everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you with my guest today, Tami Lynn Kent. She is the author of 3 books that I'm aware of that I've loved and has been so instrumental for me: Wild Feminine, Wild Creative. I have Mothering from Center, but I feel like now it's called Wild Mothering, right?
It is, yes. So this was the original, and I can tell you a
Yes,
little history. That the original
that's
book was
the one I
actually
have.
called, yeah, the original book was called Wild Mothering, and then it was a marketing decision to do this, which is very sweet. But then they
Yeah.
came back to me and asked if I wanted to re-release it, and so this book has this inside of it, so it's almost like a
Mhm.
pregnant, and more because I mothered twice as long when I re-released this. So more.
I just want to name how honored I am to speak with you. I feel like you are a true pioneer of what a medicine woman is. And I'm nervous. My heart's pounding. I'm tracking that. And I have been such a student of your work for so long from afar. We've never spoken before, but it's really a dream of mine to be in conversation with you today. So just thank you so much from the bottom of my heart and my womb.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you for even just acknowledging the vulnerability because I think I'm nervous every time I have to sit down and do something new. And I've learned to live on the edge of that comfort. It's like that's
Mhm.
how growth happens is pushing yourself. So I always welcome that feeling, even though I know it's not comfortable. And I'm sure as we get into it, it'll feel more like medicine than jitters.
Yes, before we hit record, you were saying, let's just make medicine. And I love that so much. And like the very realness of the human part of you as well, because it's so easy to revere your work. It can feel very nerve wracking to speak with someone like you that has all this knowledge, and also naming that can feel a palpable heart to heart connection with you where we're on the same plane and we're just here in it together. So I just thought we could open up with the heart and womb connection, because before you arrived into this space, I was leaning into my discomfort as you were speaking about, and what I was hearing is like you're doing good and the fear is welcome here too. And I'm tracking that in my heart as well as my womb, these butterflies and the pulse beneath the palm of my hand. I would love to dive right into that heart and womb connection from your experience as an author, mother, and medicine woman. What does that mean for you, and how does that impact women and mothers?
Yes, such a good question and such a beautiful thing to dive right into because I think we're going to need our heart womb medicine more than ever.
Mm.
I would say there's so many layers to it. First of all, for me, I never learned how to care for the female body, right? As a woman in a female body. And I even tracked into a profession that's supposed to care for the female body because it's women's health PT. And there's a level of care that's still, better than nothing. But what I really found was how much we don't take care of the female body or don't seem to even know how to take care of it. So my journey has really been tracking back to true care of the female body, beginning with actually listening to the body and the body herself. She's so wise. And in most holistic medicines, there is actually a listening to the body, taking pulses, or that's more the original medicine. It's more a patriarchal form to come in and say, I'm the expert, I have the knowledge out here, versus being with, working with. That's a much more feminine approach and also more true for the female body. So for me, one of the things I learned, and it might be one of the most fundamental things, is that our womb has medicine. It is a portal, it's a place where we download information. And then our heart is part of that stabilizing force because having a portal in your body is pretty wild and intense.
Mhm. Yeah.
We download the community, we download the children, like we have the portal within us, and that's why women are so powerful. It's also probably why patriarchal forces would like to
Suppress.
suppress. That's a general word, right? But we know
Yeah.
we'd like to have it be gone. But the truth can never be denied. We are the portal. We download the children and really the medicine for the community. So we need something to kind of stabilize that power, and it's the heart. And there's a chi channel between the heart and the womb that runs bidirectionally. It runs from the heart to the womb and from the womb to the heart. And I think of this as the heart is the most powerful energy in the body because it has love, which is the most powerful current there is on the
Mhm.
planet. And when we take that heart energy and wash it like a waterfall over our womb, it gives us the strength that we need to make the medicine for any time we're in, which is, quite intense right now, I would say. So when we take that heart energy and we bring it down to our womb, it's almost like feeding ourselves first so that we can then do the work that we need to do. There's so many applications I could expand on that, but that's.
Yeah, I love the visual that you shared of the heart washing over the womb. I actually learned this. I'm a somatic student, so we spoke about how it's interconnected through the vagus nerve. And
Mm,
then one thing that I found so fascinating, well, one thing that I have realized in my own journey is like heart and earth are made up of the same letters. And there's such a resonance there when we're actually like connecting with our feet on the ground, for example, and noticing the frequency that's emitted from our heart versus like, just thinking. There's just
absolutely.
definite difference. And I would love to know from you how the energetic component started to weave into your work, because you mentioned at the start Western medicine is different and there's other practices such as Eastern cultures like
Mm,
Chinese medicine, because I have an acupuncturist who goes right into the pulse and it's very energetic. It's such a different experience. But for someone that didn't know that until I was pregnant at 37 and was told I was geriatric, how might we invite women that are before this time to sort of explore that within their own field before even thinking about conception, because it's such a powerful tool.
right. Well, I would say for me, it's an activist act to tune into the body as medicine no matter when you start. And I think we have to be compassionate about the forces that maybe set this up in play. You know, we're all in Western culture, we're in patriarchal systems. Again, patriarchy is not a bad word. It's just meant to be balanced with the matriarchy. So we need masculine, feminine in balance. And
Mhm.
then the feminine, the home, the children, the elders, the medicine people are cared for. If not, they're extracted from. And that's sort of
Mhm.
the fundamental imbalance. And so I guess I would say wherever and whenever you start to learn that you are medicine in your center and not that you are the disease model, something's wrong with you and we need an external force to tell us what's going on. I'm not saying that, we shouldn't track into Western medicine. It's more that it's revolutionary to know that your body is medicine and that we as women are inherently creative because of the womb portal. We are the creators, we are the makers of so many things. And when we understand that, it really shifts everything because instead of looking at ourselves as something to fix, we understand that we are already whole and it's a way of tracking back to that inherent wholeness. It's a very different stance point.
It is. And would you say that if you are not connected with an inherent truth, for example, like a small microcosm of this might be like if you were in a relationship and you were suppressing a truth that you wanted to share, would you say that in your experience have you noticed that has manifested in like dis-ease, like no ease within the throat chakra area or energetically? And because the throat and the womb, the throat and the pelvis are interconnected, like
Yes.
how has that impacted the both and?
Absolutely. So part of this was I was working as a women's health PT and I had my hands on the body and I could feel a lot of power, but also a lot of imbalance. And I wanted to understand how do we sort of work with, how do we correct the imbalance first? It was a more simple view. And then I came to, as I was working more with the body, oh, there's actually a lot of knowledge of medicine that I don't know how to read here. Where did this come from and how do we
Mhm.
reaccess it? So for me, it was sort of again a journey back of like, oh, here I am fixing, and then I'm going to try to write the imbalances to, oh, there's actually medicine here that is when we have blocks, like you said, between the throat and the womb, or between the heart and the womb. When our creative energy isn't allowed, whether it's through our verbal expression or our visions that we're supposed to hold, or the way that we love ourselves, then there are these blocks that manifest in the body. And I think most holistic medicines look at that and they feel like the physical block happens first energetically
Mhm.
or emotionally or spiritually. And I would say that was true for me too. And I looked into the literature to kind of understand what I was seeing with women. And there was really just very general information like root chakra, second chakra. I didn't find anything that would help me understand kind of how to repair this and also help women understand their own medicine. And that's why I started writing, Wild Feminine. It took me about 8 years to write. And I
Mhm.
sat with every woman that came in. I would take notes after a day of work and kind of
Mhm.
put back together a puzzle of like, what does the left ovary mean, what does the right ovary mean, what is the womb? And it was a lot of commitment and diligence to listening. It really was like learning a language. I would say it was, I had to kind of piece it together from many women coming through and then looking at patterns and then writing about it, and the writing helped me understand it. And that's what eventually gave form to the 3 books which you were talking about. The Wild Feminine is about our pelvic bowl and the medicine in our bowl and how to access it and work with it. Wild Creative is about the field, the energy field, because it's parallel to the womb, because we all enter into the womb. That's where we form our
We all come
creative
from the
self.
womb. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's genderless. And I actually wrote that book partially for my sons so they would understand more their own
Mm,
medicine. And then wild mothering, of course, which was mothering from your center, and then wild mothering is a lot about the energetics of the body, not just for pregnancy, but for healing postpartum, for healing birth trauma, for mothering from that place. That's where mothering from your center came from. There's just
mhm.
so much medicine. I could go on and on about the medicine in our bodies as women that
Yes.
we need to like do the work that we're doing. I rely on it a lot myself for even raising three sons.
I love that so much. And two things that are standing out to me before we go even deeper is how would you define medicine? And how would you explain the spiritual aspect of it? Because sometimes those two words can hold a big charge for women that have not known or maybe not as open to this wisdom of the body.
Right. Well, okay, that's great. Those are great questions. I would say medicine for me, you see, I use it a lot. It started, what happened is when I was working on the female body, I realized, and notice I was initially working on it rather than with it. It was the
Mm,
body that started kind of communicating to me what you mostly know are anatomical words, and that doesn't even describe the depth. So I started using more poetic words, things like
mm,
pelvic bowl,
love.
wild feminine, the energy, medicine, and also, instead of seeing the body as problematic, I started to see it as a source of
Mhm,
healing and medicine. So that was sort of the beginning of my language shift, where I had been taught kind of in this very othered way, even about my own body, versus an internalized way that felt good, even from the way that when I would go into a medical provider, I didn't like the aesthetics of the room. Very often, if
mm,
you go to a medical office, it almost looks like nobody is cleaning it or painting it, or it's like people run into the walls and there's marks everywhere, and it's just like,
it's
you know,
sterile.
it's sterile, and also like nobody is tending the space. I mean, this gets
Mm,
into tending the feminine space, right? Home tending our homes, having beautiful spaces like this beautiful plant behind me. In
mhm,
my office space when I left the hospital, and where I've stayed ever since then, so almost 24 years now. I have like a beautiful, it's like a room that has cloth sheets when women come in, and there's beautiful artwork, and women always feel kind of nourished and held. And it's a very different experience for our bodies when we feel like we're in beauty. And so it was just a whole shift from, something where I always would go in a medical office, I would feel kind of cold, and I would be in this paper
mhm.
sheet, and I'd wait a long time. And just everything about it is
Yes.
not feminine, to repairing that feminine, to the beauty and the warmth and the comfort and the cozy and all of that being part of it. And so the language shift was part of that. And I think, medicine came to me, I think being raised as a Westerner, I really didn't understand more holistic and, let's say, even shamanic practices.
Mm,
It's kind of almost raised so in your head with school that it's
yeah.
hard to be connected to it. But I have something in me, and maybe it's my lineage or maybe it's a past life memory, I don't know, that kind of tracked to something else. Definitely a different little kiddo. Like I was very much, I would go to nature and I would climb trees and I would be mothered and fathered by the nature, and had a bent towards something that, shamanic medicine is really relational with earth and body. And
Mhm,
there's a level of sensitivity and feeling that is required that we used to have in all tribes. And it got, pretty much annihilated. It's alive a few places on the planet. And I think so for me, as I worked and sat and felt more with women's bodies, I started to understand there was this interface between what I will call spirit and body that a
mhm,
shamanic practitioner might understand intuitively or be taught. And it's kind of like it's the more subtle layers of spirit. In all my books, I have a little diagram, a drawing that's called the Wild Feminine Landscape, and it
yeah.
has the physical. This is something I drew out as a map to understand what I was seeing. So it's just three concentric circles to help us understand what this is. So at the core of it, there's a smaller circle that's the physical, and we could call that the pelvic bowl, or we could call that the physical body.
Mhm,
That's also where we embody our lives, the roles we take, whether we're mother, how we're living, our partnerships, our families, the physical density of life and the earth and how we embody. And then around that, I put an energetic layer, which is a little more diffuse, and it can be things like emotional patterns, thought patterns, the kind of the vibration we're in, the way that we
mhm,
live. It can be like feng shui. When you move things around physically, the energy
yeah.
flows better. So there's ways to play with that, and we might understand that. Then around around that, I drew another layer that's more of a spirit layer that I would call ancestor spirits of the land. It's another level of sensitivity. And it's really breath. It's breath comes into body, breath comes into life. And you
Mm,
see that if you have a baby, they come alive. The breath comes into the body and animates it. And we have that. And there's this connection to this more subtle layer. And I would just say, as I've over years sat with women's bodies and worked healing, I've seen, this kind of more subtle layer come through in lots of different ways, from even like spirits that felt like would come through and talk, whether they were ancestral or someone who had just passed. I mean, it can really get out there, but maybe that's just what we always knew once upon a time. We just forgot, especially as some of these things were annihilated directly. So for me,
yeah.
medicine is really something I was guided to more deeply because I was feeling more and more animated and alive in those subtleties that for me were sometimes child's play. Like something in me remembered it, and I would kind of play with, rocks and sticks and I don't know, deer bones and other things, and kind of feel something that I could that was back there somewhere. But I've
Yeah.
seen, and it's helped me realize that those are real medicine forms that are, subtle. They're just people that speak the language and understand the subtleties.
Yeah. I'm just taking everything you said in because as you were speaking, if I could describe medicine, it was this feeling of just nourishment. And I can connect to what you're saying through my own work, which I don't even have words for yet. But what I'm hearing you say through your own way is it sounds like there seems to be this allyship in medicine. There's a deep rooted sense of interconnection and how we're not, yes, we're individuals having this human experience, but at the root of it, there's so much more happening beyond the senses that we can't always put into tangible form that is happening for us and through us. Like when you say way out there, it could go way out there with the ancestry and how you've worked with other women and what you may have encountered. Like I'm all for the out there things because I feel like it's just as important as what we can physically see with our senses.
Absolutely. I wish sometimes I could give, it's been interesting being a mother to three sons and a husband because they're a little more naturally pragmatic being male. When they were little and children, they were all about the mystery. And like my oldest son talked about his brother before he came in, and he could
Wow.
see things and feel things and he could articulate them. And then you go into the regular world and it gets kind of shut down. And I think unless you're taken into the wild and encouraged on these threads, they do kind of dampen, especially, with reality. My own experience of sitting in the room with women and getting to talk to them and working on losses and deep traumas and the things that I've seen, not only is it heartening the amount of medicine we can make no matter what has happened, it's also been fascinating because there'll be spirit communications or things come through, someone who's lost someone, a brother or a parent or something, and something will get said and I'll share it and it's bone deep for them. They can
Mm,
feel it and they hear it. Or ancestry, even when someone is, in the United States where I work, people are pretty fragmented. It's a culture that talks about independence, but it really is talking about fragment. So a lot of people's ancestry are immigrant and come from other places, so it's the people that left for whatever reason or were taken here, so there's that. But
mm,
what I notice is sometimes a thread will come through and it won't make sense. We'll be in this healing space and it'll make bone sense truth to the person on the table, and it will help them understand some aspect of their ancestry or some aspect of their lineage that seemed abstract. And that just happens over and over again. So it's helped me formulate more of an idea of what the mystery is and
mhm.
what people talk about ancestor worship or ancestor honoring, and it's like I start to understand it as a real energetic force that people can bridge and tap into, that those of us that have lost that really are missing out.
Yeah, there's something that comes to mind when you're speaking, and I've studied a womb sciences course through this woman named Usha Nandi. She's also a medicine woman. She's amazing. And one thing she speaks to in her womb sciences is that when your grandmother is 4 months pregnant with the fetus of your mother, the fetus of your mother at 4 months contains all the eggs it will need to birth myself and so forth. And so, on an energetic level, our story begins in utero. And even before that, like in our great grandmother's womb and generations past. And it just makes me think of I've birthed two children myself, you've birthed three boys, but it just adds a different layer and meaning to the blood, like the waters of our body and the waters of the earth. I don't know, like I get chills when I think about it. I think about like when I cut an apple open and it has a bunch of seeds, and knowing that it took 8 years. So somebody somewhere out there harvested, like planted this thing that's harvested. Now
Right.
it's in my hands and it's going to nourish my children, and my children will go on to ripple that energy into whatever they express. And then it's the same through birth as a portal, women as a portal through our blood and our breath, and what you're speaking to, the ancestry. And I just, it just like, it blows my mind.
Right.
Like, how do
Well,
you steward that? It's just
I know. I
big.
think, well, yes, I think it's the big picture and the little picture, right? But I think what you're talking about is a level of understanding that also brings responsibility. And I think,
Yes.
that's why for me too. So when I added to this book, Wild Mothering, what
Hmm.
happened again, as I said, this was a marketing decision to call it Mothering from Your Center. And
Hmm.
then 12 years later, they came back to me and just said, do you want to do the original title, original cover? Which I was like,
Beautiful
yes.
cover.
And
Beautiful.
I hired someone to do drawings of birth energy and all sorts of cool things. But I added two new chapters, and one of those chapters I called "The Beauty of the Elder Mother."
Mm.
And that's the mother who, it's not age, it's a depth of wisdom that is like bone deep. And it's exactly what you were just describing. There's a knowledge that there's a thread that reaches way before you and is continuing after you.
Mm.
And I think it's what gives us continuity, understanding of the importance of what we're doing, and also a relational based responsibility of like, what are we leaving and how are we leaving it? It's interconnected and it's interwoven. And I think the thing I know, because it could be daunting, right, to think about that, especially in some of the things that are happening right now. But when
Hmm.
we tune into our bodies and we tune into that medicine thread that's there, there's something hopeful and rich in that, because nothing can destroy that medicine. It
Hmm.
can try to get people to separate from it, but the feminine can never die. And this is the thread that we have the medicine within us to carry this type of responsibility and this type of power.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's like, as you're speaking to power, it makes me think of the difference between having power with versus power over, that when we're actually attuned to the wisdom of our body, it becomes this emergence of something that can never leave us versus the
Oh,
conditionings having power over what
for
is
yes.
within us.
We're absolutely seeing some things play out right now where there are individuals that don't understand that, because when you're in that groundedness, you innately want to caretake. You don't want to take, you don't want to harvest. And that's the
Yeah.
fundamental difference, is relational based. I have enough. How can I caretake? How can we share? Versus I am lacking. I need more and I need to take. And whenever you see that, that's a disconnect from the feminine. That when someone is feminine or has their feminine essence, which really is the connection to the mystery and the divine breath and all
Hmm.
of that, then they naturally want to be creative and generative and relational. And it's something I've paid a lot of attention to raising boys. So it's something I talk about quite a bit, and just taught a class with my oldest son who's turning
Yeah.
25 in a little bit, about the differential, male or female, when you have that connectivity. And you'll see that people that have that connectivity are working on repair and working on building and
Yeah.
working on generative energy and working on, their own creativity and what they're bringing to the planet, versus taking. And, that's when someone is disconnected from their own source point.
Yeah, it sounds like the difference between extracting from something versus engaging and learning and holding
So,
space for difference.
absolutely.
I want to talk about that, raising three boys. What is that like, raising three boys and having a husband, being in a world of all this masculine energy, even though I know within each of us there's a masculine and feminine dynamic? What was it like, or what is it like to raise them? I know that some of them play music, or one of them do. Beautiful work.
Yes.
Because I've
Yeah. I
sorry, I just wanted to say what was that like? Because you're immersed in the women's world with your work in medicine. So what was it like at home?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think there's a reason I have three sons. Many people would say to me, "It's too bad you don't have daughters, with the work you do." And the more I understood kind of what's happening to men and boys, the more I
Mhm.
realized it was vital to have this kind of knowledge, because the female body, so let's say you have daughters and you work on keeping them connected to their body, they, even if they have things that happen, they have this generative womb inside.
Mhm.
Males are a little more vulnerable than we realize, and if they get the feminine strip mind out of them, I think they're more likely to act out in ways that are harmful. to the rest of the
Mhm.
world. So it's kind of a high level responsibility, but also it's vital for their own well being for them to have the feminine. And again, it's beyond gender, as you say. It's the feminine is our original when we come in, it's our connection to the mystery and the magic. And it's why
Mhm.
babies and children are kind of full of wonder.
Yeah.
So that's where they start. And then how we caretake them matters. So, keeping that sensitivity alive, keeping them in aware of their own beauty and their own mystery and also their own creativity. That's for me, I kind of started to use the word creativity instead of just feminine. That's why I wrote the book Wild Creative for them, because if you can stay connected to your creative inspiration, flows generally from the feminine. From feminine is right brain, left body in general, being
Right.
most people code it. And so it's that color and beauty and texture that makes life amazing. And
Mhm.
we need it no matter what is happening, when it's hard, when it's whatever. So boys though get that kind of strip mind partially because of sensitivity, right? Boys don't cry. And even if you're in places where you think it would be more protected, like I was at a school that was more holistic with my oldest son when he was 5, and we were at a lunch where I was helping volunteer as a parent, and another little girl was crying, and another little boy was asking about it, and I was trying to explain to the little boy why she might be crying. Maybe she missed her parents, and my son started kicking me under the table, kind of like, shh. And later, when I asked him about it, he said, boys don't talk about feelings. And already at 5, even in that place, he
Mhm.
had coded that. And so it's kind of our job to guard. So it was, I would say it was a beautiful experience for me raising boys because I got to see how quickly we shut them down, even in holistic spaces. And part of it's because boys use less words overall. Again, we're
Mhm.
being general. I have 3 boys, they're all different. But boys are very intuitive, but they're less word oriented, partially because they were the hunters and the fighters and they were out
Yeah.
in the field and they couldn't speak. And so, if you are a mother and you have your feminine intact, you'll see that, you'll witness that, and you won't expect them to translate it to words, and they'll feel seen, and it keeps that open. Same with when we send them into schools. And I unfortunately watched the downside of this where teachers that weren't intact in their own feminine, a little bit more harsh, because you
Mhm.
can be female and shut down in your feminine, and a little bit more stereotyped in sort of their expectations. And they would critique and be harsh on the boys and miss their cues for connection, their cues for
Yeah.
communication. So for me, I got to witness how that kind of rolls out, and also the responsibility that I had to keep it intact, which I mostly fed through creativity. So yes, I have a son who's musical, fed that a lot, his own creative music, and all the lessons and things that,
Mhm.
to keep that alive. But my middle son found it more in soccer. He was very creative in the field. And this is where we don't want to stereotype too much, because I could, if you had a prescribed notion of creativity, you might shut that down. But I watched how free he felt on the soccer field, how much he was looking at the field as kind of an energetic, way of moving, and where he was positioning himself. So we kept his creativity alive more through that sports way of, just being. And I think so, we don't want to put too many boundaries around it. We just want to
Right.
see where our child's passion is and then feed it. And my youngest is just creative in all kinds of different ways. He loves to sew, he loves to be on the computers. I mean, he does lots of different things. But it was also hard, I think, at times, because being the only female, I shifted my coding to match them and use less words, but they didn't always adapt back to me, especially as testosterone came online. And
Right.
that's where some of the initial book, I was probably a little bit more, I got this figured out, and I had a
Right.
12-year-old was my oldest, and my youngest was 5. And then I went through the next 12 years where testosterone came online. We went through a pandemic. The world got a little rawer, and we had different bumps and things. And so this book is really written more from that, the intensity of what it is to try to raise healthy boys in a world that's not really giving them any guideposts. And it's beautiful and hard, brutal.
Yeah, for sure. And you're with your husband too. Has he been on board with everything the way that you were so immersed with your feminine and the way you raised your boys? Like, how did that impact you relationally? Because I know in some relationships, it's really hard for males and females, or the feminine and the masculine, to understand each other's love language. It's like we could be trying to
Absolutely.
convey the same thing, but the way through which that is expressed might not be received in a way that we recognize, or vice versa,
Absolutely.
you know? And
I,
same
I
with
think
children.
Yes, I think every family would have its own growth paths, right? I think for my husband, his growth path was he was raised with sisters. He was the only boy
Okay.
in a family, and his dad was a little more intellectual. He was a brilliant mathematician who kind of was in his head. So it really actually challenged both my husband and I. We're like, who are these creatures and what is happening? And I think, both of us, we would maybe do a few things differently had we been more aware of, like, the boys need a lot of like mentors and role models. And like everyone, right, we're supposed to be
Mhm.
raised with a lot of mothers and a lot of fathers. And we did our best to pull those in through coaches and teachers. But I think like our oldest son often felt like he was charting the path himself. And he
Yeah.
was a surfer and neither of us surfed, and we put him in the water in Oregon, and I mean he got in a rip tide, and it was
Oh god.
he had to find his way out of that. And I would say that's similar, where he has always had a quest to understand masculinity and brotherhood, and sometimes in hard ways because he's trying to track, males who maybe aren't as healthy and find his own way through it. And when we were just teaching this class together, I think he has felt out front of his dad or I, which is hard, and I said,
Yeah.
well, being a leader, like it's not,
Yeah.
nobody's carving the path for you, but he is carving the path for his brothers and kind of giving them feedback, and not always feedback they want, mind you, but he also is really there for them when they are trying to find out how do they express their masculinity, and where are they, what does it look like to be a good man, and what does it look like to be also kind to yourself while you're trying to express your masculinity. And I would say one thing I've learned is we can't have healthy men by repressing masculinity. And that is some of the things I've witnessed in some of the more, different communities have different ways of engaging with masculinity. There can be the toxic masculinity and shut down the feminine, don't be
Mhm.
sensitive, but there also can be the over sensitivity, but you have to do it a certain way, and then you can't express in this way.
Yeah.
So, I've watched my boys really grappling with that, and, my husband learning right along with them.
That's so beautiful. It sounds like it's very much like we're all in it together. And I'm curious for you as a mom, do you believe that it was like an innate thing for your oldest to feel that way, or is it unique to him as being the older child? Like, do you think that was just his
Right.
personality or because he was the firstborn?
I think it's a combination. He's definitely a classic firstborn, like leader type energy, but also he just, his dad and I are kind of hippie, like we're a little less like, I don't know, we're just kind of earthy people. And even at the age of like 13, 14, it was right when the internet was kind of starting, to get going. He was looking at, people who were talking about watches, guys that were talking about fancy watches, and kind of like not just fancy, but like the beauty of the watch, and the man, and da da da. And same with cologne. And he would research these. And I still remember taking him into a store where he had saved his money to get a really nice watch. And, he spent like, I don't know, probably almost $400 on this watch. And they didn't take him very seriously at first, but he was serious. He knew his stuff. And eventually he would grow into that guy that would be with the watch and the cologne. And, he works as a model. And I'm like, you kind of knew where you were going, but you couldn't track from either of us. It was just
So
really interesting.
interesting.
So very innate, I would say. And yeah, I think that's just one of his things he's learning in this lifetime,
Mhm.
So it's always a balance. And I think this is more the elder mother view, where you go, "Oh, okay, you maybe needed more support in these ways, but you found it on your own because it was part
Yeah.
of you. We can only give our kids so much, and they will track partially just based on what they're here to learn."
Yeah, and it's this humbling reminder that they are their own people and that motherhood could sometimes be a pulverizing journey of heartbreak. Especially with
Oh,
boys.
yes,
I have a
indeed.
3-year-old boy. I'm only 3 years in, and I have a 1-year-old daughter. And so it's like, yeah, my heart's always breaking, but it's always expanding. It's just like the
Totally.
wildest journey.
Well, and it'll be a gift for him that he has a sister. One of the things that I had to
Yeah.
mourn was that I was often the only female voice, and especially during the pandemic. But I would say there's a benefit to have, because mom, they're only going to listen to so much. And then a sister has a different way that they maybe relate or see the world through her eyes, and it can be a real gift. So that's a beautiful thing. The other thing I would say, a 3-year-old, 4-year-old boy is in some ways one of the harder times besides testosterone. I'll just warn you, like when testosterone comes on, be prepared for a grumpy bear in your house. But that age, 3 to 4, they have a lot of big energy and they
Mhm.
can't contain it yet with their brains. And so, they might have a lot of meltdowns or intensity. That was a time. So I got a lot of books around emotions, and I would read, just the simple books, but like Glad Monster, Sad Monster, or Jamie Lee Curtis, Today I Feel Silly, and Other Moods. That's a good time to have those kind of
Okay.
books and read them. I also got a manners book, which is like very Montessori, but it actually was helpful, just to kind of help, because it's a little bit like, the child's throwing a fit and nobody really wants to be around that, and it's a little old school, but it actually helped my boys kind of go, oh, like, just to see a little bit more, not to shame, but to have a little bit more
Yeah.
awareness for behavior. And there's also a book called Who's Calling the Shots by Matt Damon's mom, who talks
Okay.
about foreplay. And there's a little drawing on the front with a little stick figure with a gun. And it's helpful to understand because around that age, everything becomes a weapon. And I started to
So
understand it
true.
was, yeah. I mean, I was a little afraid of it at first. And I think I got her book. And then I started to understand that rather than repressing it, I would kind of like, so here's the difference. So, like, when it first was happening and I didn't really understand, I'd be like, ooh, a gun? Really? I don't know if I like that, and it was a lot of more repression and fear. And so then I learned kind of from her book how normal it is. And I would start to say things like, wow, look at all the guns on that ship. We're going to be really protected.
Mm,
And look at all the colors and the shapes that you put together. And admiring kind of what they built,
yeah.
and it completely changed the energy of it because we
Mm,
need boys to understand how to handle that intensity in them. Now, she talks about later when they're maybe doing video games, that's a little different where you might, need to be involved a bit more or at least have awareness. But what I found is giving my boys a lot of love, a lot of connection, a lot of touch, and good foundations in their own feminine, like it's okay to feel, and
mhm.
witnessing them really buffered them against some of those things later where they had a good, like a good internal radar to handle the intensity of being male.
Yeah, and it really shifts the framework around gun, like versus like when I think of gun, I'm like you, like, oh no, gun, but then also like naming the other aspects that are around it, the context by which they're being creative with. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and I love that your work has been like a love letter to women. And I'm so curious for you within your own journey of being pregnant, because you had three boys. That's amazing. What was that like for you being pregnant, knowing the medicine you knew? Did you? I remember reading in, I believe it was Mothering from Center, and let me know if we can't go here if it's tender, but you experienced a miscarriage and it was a little girl, right?
That was my sense. I never like did any tests. It was just like I felt her energy and felt her spirit very strongly.
Yeah. Or do you feel okay going there and just sort of speaking to that experience as well as how
Absolutely.
your own medicine helped you and other women move through such a tender experience?
Absolutely. I would say, a lot of my awakening to this medicine happened while going through it. It wasn't like, so my first son, I had really no awareness for the mystery of pregnancy and I approached it a lot more pragmatically.
Yeah.
Certainly, I was excited to be pregnant. I had always wanted to be a mother and I was very excited that he came in, but I wasn't aware of how sensitive babies are. And, it just probably would have done a few things differently, but, that's how you learn. I always tell him, you're my first pancake. Thank you for coming in. So a lot of the I would just say be compassionate with yourself for what you know when you know it, because that is, we learn as we go. And I think so much of it too, you learn by the experience that the child's bringing in. So
Yeah.
there's can't really be ahead of it, nor should you be. And I think my one compassion for mothers today is they have more information, but they almost have too much information where it's sort of like you feel like any misstep, you're going to do something wrong. And so it's more about being embodied, being loving with yourself, and kind of learning as you go, because you will learn as you go. For me, I would say the medicine that I know is a lot of times what I wish I'd had. So I am taking that elder mother role of like, here's the medicine for this experience, here's the medicine for this experience. So, same with my next pregnancy, ended up being a miscarriage in my second pregnancy, and I wasn't sure if I was miscarrying. It was very confusing. Then I didn't have a pause. I thought I was pregnant. and then I
Mhm.
didn't have a positive pregnancy test, then I did have one, then I did miscarry. So there's a lot of like confusion, I would say, sometimes where you're like trying to trust your intuition, but then you're not sure. And my little son was piping up too, like, oh, mom, you're pregnant. And then, oh, no, you're not pregnant. And it was just like, here he was reading the room too. And it was a lot of confusion. So I think for me, I just would always make medicine with whatever was happening. So
Mhm.
when I was going through, and that's what I wrote about in the books. Like I wrote about being confused and feeling compelled to drive down to this place called Brighton Bush that is like this sanctuary earth place because I felt like I was maybe pregnant and miscarrying or something, but I didn't have clear information. But I went down there and had this complete birth experience in one of the pools with three women that came in and were all healers. And I write about the story, so I won't go into it now, but it was confusing, but also happening. And then I wrote about it and witnessed this spirit being, which looked like more of a goddess than an actual baby, lifting from my body. And
Mhm.
I went through labor. Like I went into shallow breathing and was like, or did kind of the intensity of breathing until something lifted from me. And these three women were there to witness it. They were all older than me, and one of them had just had her son died in a car accident. He was 22, and I didn't know this until after, but I was starting to go into birth movements and asked if there were healers. And these three women, of course, came through. And, it's like classic Brighton Bush, which is this hot
Oh
springs
my
where
gosh. So
healers abound.
you didn't even know they were gonna be there?
No, I mean, it was one of those things where I was trusting and following, and they were
Wow.
full. And I said, please, can you let me in? And I drove part way there with my baby son, or, toddler son, my older son, and
Mhm.
kind of, and then pulled over and they had a space. So then we kept going and then went there. And then I was starting to have this pain in my womb. And I
Aw.
was miscarrying, but I just didn't know yet because we don't really talk about it.
Mhm.
And I started to have this severe pain. And I remember saying to Spirit, I'm going to need help. If this is, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to need help. And that's when these three women who were all older healers walked through and kind of almost
Wow.
did a Watsu session with me. Like one sat with my 2-year-old, one held my body, and one kind of held my head. I just went through this breathing and felt this something lift off and saw in my mind's eye, but saw this powerful goddess looking woman.
Mhm.
She looked kind of like an Indian goddess where they're, draped in a certain kind of way. And she had some messages, and then I came back to myself, and it was, bizarre kind of, but also powerful. And just one of those things where you like something profound just happened.
Yeah.
And that was when one of the women, the woman who sat with my 2-year-old, said to me, thank you. I really needed this too because my son just died.
Right.
And of course, I had littles, so I didn't even, now I really understand what that level of mothering is like, where you've mothered for that long and then to lose one. And so, then I went back home and then I actually bled and had a physical miscarriage. So it was,
Wow.
I would say there wasn't any, I was just following the
Right.
thread into things, and then wrote. And that's why in the most recent Wild Mothering book, I actually drew an image of one of the energies that the body sent me on doing a birth repair or a miscarriage repair through the energy field. And it's a diagram of when a woman loses a pregnancy, what that looks like, the meditation. So I had someone draw what I see when I work with the energetics of that, because again, I didn't have anybody that was working with me except this spirit energy experience where these women came and
Yeah.
helped me. But I've worked with many women since then, usually after miscarriage, because they're often in the experience I was in where they're like, am I pregnant? What's happening? It's
Yeah.
just, you sometimes have to work with the energetics afterwards. So many of these things I would say have just been, kind of how medicine is made, which is you learn as you go and you keep making more, and the body teaches you more and life teaches you, and circumstances happen and you have to continue. And for me, that phrase of making medicine has become sort of a statement of how I will respond, because life happens and trauma happens and hard things happen, but women are the medicine makers and we can always make medicine.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to say, like, I don't want to give it all away because some people will go out and read your book after this. And for those that have, they might know how incredibly, when you wrote that piece, I was just so, I mean, all your writing's so beautiful, but I was really captivated. Like, I felt like I was right there with you in the experience. And so I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about that, because I feel like in birth world, we don't talk about death. We don't talk about so much about the things that can go not the way we expect it. And that, to go to that really uncomfortable gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching place where there too can be medicine. And I understand that can be nuanced because we're not always ready or have the capacity to access it in that moment. But I just appreciate you sharing that because I feel like I know personally in my experience, we didn't even talk about the things that could go
I
sideways
know.
or,
I know. Right.
and it makes us fear as a culture, over culture. I feel like we
Right.
fear death, but then death is a part of birth, but not like
Right.
even being a physical death, but energetically, we die in birth because
Do.
we're
Yes.
not the same woman we are as
Right.
after.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think grief and, learning to let go and meeting those things, it's where I learned to spend my time. Absolutely. Is in the conversations that weren't had and in the spaces in my office. I've so often been in a conversation with a woman where she hasn't had space to share what happened to her, whether it's
Yeah.
an abuse experience or whether it's a birth trauma or there's just so many places where we do need the medicine in those. And for me, that's my comfort. I've learned that that's some of the most powerful things, especially places where there's shame or fear, because there's so much potential in those spaces, especially when we kind of reverse that and we go towards it. I feel the same way about birth trauma, where I have a whole chapter in the Wild Mothering or Mothering from Your Center book, whichever one you have, on the power of birth energy, because I wanted to tell the stories when birth didn't go as planned and how we can still make energy medicine. And in fact, it's very important to do so because the birth field is something a mother can draw upon and work with as medicine for the whole life of her child. So it's kind of like an energetic tapestry. That's what it looks like to me. And so it should be clear and feeling good. And it gets tangled sometimes with birth trauma. And so we can actually work on that, repair that, and then give that woman and child a huge gift. So, I like to be in those spaces where things don't go quite as well as we would think, or we feel ashamed, or, that's where the most powerful medicine is made.
Yeah, and also, like, sometimes people don't know what to say to mothers who have had birth. Like, if birth can is traumatic in general, but then when that language around, like, well, at least you and your baby are
Mhm.
safe, but it's almost
Right.
like, and she's still like, but what? Like, what just
Right. Something
happened?
doesn't feel right. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a beautiful story in the birth chapter book that was from a friend of mine. The stories to me are medicine. They're originally what we used
Yeah.
to sit around the fire, right, and share stories. And that's another way we made medicine, women, with our words and telling you like, oh, here's this, and we can apply this, and so on. But I was with a friend of mine who had a 29-year-old daughter, and that daughter was getting ready to get pregnant, and it was triggering all of this birth trauma from her birth with her 29 years earlier. And so my friend
Mm.
was just going into trauma, and I said, okay, sit down. Let's work on this. So we did a birth repair, like a meditation, the way I know how to do it. She sat under a tree and we kind of did this visualization. And we weren't in a clinic setting, we were just under a tree, and lots of tears, and it was beautiful to witness and really sweet. But what was fascinating was after that, she and I parted, and I was like, here, let's make medicine in the place of this so you can look forward to your daughter getting pregnant. And so then she left, and it turned out her daughter was looking at a piece of land that they were going to hopefully buy, and her daughter had called her because she said, all of a sudden I laid down and I felt all the love of my family. And part of the birth energy repair is you're sending the womb chi to your child, whatever their age is. So we had like visualized, she had like worked with the womb and sending the womb energy all the way through to her. So she said, I was just felt so good. And so they had this moment, tears and healing. And then she conceived their grandchild that night.
That's wild.
And then gave birth about 9 months later. On They got the land and had the home, and she gave a home birth. And Mama, my friend, grandma now, was there and ended up being able to stand and kind of hold her daughter as she daughter was pushed out their baby. And so there was this big healing because she
Yeah.
was not conscious she had an emergency cesarean where she got knocked out. And so it was like this massive healing. So that story, Healing Birth Across Three Generations, is in the book, and it's a medicine story everyone should read to kind of understand how there isn't really a time frame around this birth energetics, and there's so much power in healing. They sat and wrote the story, and I helped them write it so we would get it down, because it was just, again, these things, you can't make this up. It's so fascinating, and so potent.
I am just holding back the tears while really letting them fall. That's such a beautiful story and so powerful. It makes me think of my own birth. I feel like there's a lot of like incomplete with Leilani, my daughter. And I'd love to know from your experience, how could you just tease out a little more how our birth stories, like the mom had birth trauma based on her daughter going into that part of her journey,
Mhm.
how does our own birth stories, I'm trying to find the words around it, but how does it connect with our mothers? Like my mother's birth story, we both had blood loss.
Mm,
And to my mom, she's just like, I love her so much. And she's just like, oh, yeah, I had blood and I had to get a transfusion. And I also had to do that.
right,
But like for me, because of the womb work I've been immersed in, I'm like, there's got to be a connection
right.
there. But I haven't even had a closing of the bones yet. And I really feel called
Mhm.
to do that. But the timing I
So,
feel is intentional. So I'm wondering for you, like, what is that? What it?
yeah, well, I think, so maybe I should just track back a bit and say, what happened is when I had my oldest, I tripped and fell with him when he was a newborn. I was not aware I needed to rest. I was out walking, tripped and fell.
Mhm.
And, it was actually a pretty traumatic fall. And we ended up in the hospital and he was fine in the end, but it was like, he was newborn and we fell on the sidewalk. And so I ended up on the table with him with a healer named Sheila Murphy, who worked a lot on birth trauma and worked a lot on just infants and also animals, the unspoken realm, right? And
Mhm.
so I ended up, it was so profound watching her work on him and his response. And it was one of the things that woke me up to how aware babies are. And I asked her if she would want to do a training. And so she did a 2-year training that I joined. And it was really fascinating because we were working on
Mhm.
things like birth trauma through cranial sacral work and body work. Now, because I worked on women, I was at that time I was working on women and babies, and I would have babies in the room sometimes. And I found it easier to work on women. So instead of doing all the birth work, I started on a baby. I started working on the mother, and I got to witness. So I sometimes would have a baby in the room, like in arms of a doula. As I was working on the birth movement with a woman on the table, I would witness, or we would all witness, the energy transfer to the child, and the child might start to go through birth movements and things like that. And it was pretty fascinating.
Wow.
Again, it's more like the wild feminine landscape, right? It's spirit and body, it's energy,
Right.
it's life force, it's breath. There's something coming in. Now, do people function without that? Yes, people still get up and do things, and you can be embodied even if you have a traumatic birth. And there's lots of ways
Mhm.
we compensate and cope. But what I found was then I started making it my study and really watching, and anybody that comes in that feels incomplete, like you just said, there's probably a little disruption in the energetics. And so we go through the meditation of moving that energy and kind of completing it wherever it was disrupted. I've written about it in Mothering from Your Center. It's like almost like a recipe. It's an energy meditation. And I have now diagrams because I hired someone to, mom to draw the beautiful birth energetics. So it was kind of years distilled of, practice distilled into this. But it's something that we can always tap into. And I think it's something that is a felt sense in the body. And there is this subtle way in which a mother will feel it. And I have
Mhm.
talked to so many now where they're like, I feel like a little bit of interference energy, or I feel a little bit disconnected, or I feel a little bit something. And we do this and it shifts it. And it's kind of like my friend shifted it. She just said, something
Mhm.
shifted there for me, even though it had been 29 years. And it's not
Yeah.
that we might need to still go over it a bit. Like I even had an example of one of my children. I didn't know in my earlier births that I was like at transition. And so I was like about to birth in a tub, and I was at the hospital and they said, oh, let's get you up down the room. So like a good girl, I got up and walked down the room, and it really interrupted the birth process.
Oh,
So it
yes.
was subtle, but I've worked with that at various times. Whenever I feel like my son is hitting an edge where he maybe needs a little bit more
Mhm.
boost, I'll actually work with that meditation of repairing that little blip, and it's just like a simple thing I might do, occasionally, like once a year or twice a year, or when I notice something. I also work with their birth energy on their birthdays just to kind of download the energy.
Love that.
And I work with it when I don't know what they need or they're struggling, so when they have a medical procedure, like it's a download that you're basically giving yourself and them. And the repair is just so you have access to that more easily. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm curious if that, when you speak to birth energy disruption, can that have implications on how the child experiences their life? Like, because you
For
mentioned your
sure.
son, just how that might show up later on through everyday circumstances. So,
For sure.
and when you
Mhm.
go there, is that opportunity for repair for yourself as well as the mother of that child?
Absolutely. And I think I would say, I always dose this with a big compassion heart, because some of the people that work in the birth field on the baby side, like where I trained with Sheila and learned about this, they can get a little, I think, too intense about it. Where as a mom, you're just like, oh my God, I ruined my child forever. So it's like, I like to, like, dose it down a little bit. Like, we have to remember kids have gone through so many things, and some of those things make them more resilient. So it's like, first start with that. And then, yes, what I like to do is a meditation where a woman will, so I can just talk to you about it in a nutshell, just so people have it in their
Mm,
mind. So it's pretty simple. Again, the body taught me this, but I always have women, the mother, to envision herself in a beautiful place, wherever she wants to be, so that she
mhm.
can kind of clear out whatever it was. Like maybe there was something traumatic, or it was hospital or whatever, that gets cleared out. And then feel into the womb, and she tunes into the womb. I always invite her to remember the babe in her womb and that felt sense, and then see them at their current age. So like with my friend who had the 29-year-old, we envisioned, and then she saw her, as a grown woman. So it's whatever age they are. And then there's titration to this, so I'm
Yeah.
kind of probably oversimplifying it, but it's okay. I want women to have access to this, and that's why I put it in the book. So then I
Mhm.
invite them to feel their womb and allow it to open. So the womb dilates physically and opens, but it also, there's an energy door that dilates. So I'll say, go ahead and dilate and allow that to open. And sometimes there's a little bit of repair, like maybe that didn't get started, or maybe it started, but then it stopped, or maybe it was going, but then all of a sudden a bunch of fear was in the room. So we work with it becoming a smooth opening, and this time there's beauty around it instead of anything else. So it's just
Yes.
this nice, relaxed opening. Then envision the energy coming down through and out and onto the heart. So the first imprint is onto the heart, and that helps because some babies get that heart moment, some have to be taken. That's another
Yeah.
piece of disruption. So we re-anchor that, and then you send the current through time to whatever age. So with my friend who she had ended up, she had started with a regular birth experience, that then an intern wanted to put a scalp probe into her daughter's head, and so it was putting this little pokey thing, because this is the 70s when you just did whatever
Okay.
doctor said, especially. And
Right.
her daughter didn't like it and pulled back and disrupted the connection to the cervix. Then they never got their groove again. And so she
Mhm.
started going into distress. So they opted for cesarean, but accidentally gave my friend too much sedative, and she was completely out for like 12 hours. So that was their experience. So a lot of missed pieces. So
Yeah.
with her, I was working with returning to her body, feeling every step of it. With her, it was interesting. I could almost feel some of the anesthesia that was, it was like, move that out, move that out, move that out, bring in fresh
Mhm.
air, light. So there's different points of repair. And then you're giving that chi to that child, you can set intentions in that, like whatever you're wanting, and then you close the portal back up. So that's it in a nutshell. And
Right.
it is both, as you were saying, it is medicine for you as mom. So you receive it. So my friend received it because there was grief about not birthing. She got to receive like the felt sense. And then you are also giving it to your child. So it's like an energetic connection that just makes it a little easier to know where they are in space. That's what I would say.
It sounds really powerful, and we might have to have a little chat after this so I can see how I can connect with you on that. I just want to be mindful of time, though. Are you okay to go for another 10 more minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So, to circle back to the start of this, the heart and womb connection, I have 3 pages of quotes that I wanted to bring forth. And it's like this medicine wanted to be what it is through our heart forward conversation here. Just to wrap things up, there's just a few that I want to share, and I was hoping you could tease them out with me because I feel like they were so instrumental in my path and maybe for someone that's listening as well. Okay, so here's one of them from Mothering from Center. Mothers have the potential to sense the family energy. And I think this is really big because I can't tell you how many times as a mother and even as a woman where intuitively there's always this nudge that happens. Usually it's a soft whisper and sometimes it's more urgent, but I can't tell you how many times I've overridden it before I was able to anchor into the power of my own body. So I was wondering if you could just speak to mothers about harnessing that and like learning to trust that because especially in a culture where we're taught to be far away from it.
Yes, I think just there's so many things I could say with that, but I think the more that we trust it for ourselves, it's really a gift for the family.
Right.
Because it's kind of like, I always think women are kind of like the captain of the ship. They see what's coming, they see the storms, they sense, they kind of It's like, what's the weather
Yeah.
doing? And we're discounted, and yet it's so important to understand that this is our superpower as women. We're the womb, we are the
Yeah.
center, we are the ones who download. And so, it's very important to understand that that is real and true, and that, it actually saves things in the long run when you do that. They're just little things. Like, I remember, like, someone, another mom maybe reaching out on a group, said if someone could pick up their child, and I started to reach, and I got a little, and then it turned out that my son ended up being sick or something. And so it was like there was a knowledge there that actually kind of helps things shift into place.
Yeah.
Also, one of your children has something going on, it's like mother's intuition is very real and very
Mhm.
powerful. So always trusting that and responding to it. I can't state that enough. And I would say the only thing I would add is mothers need to take a lot of care of themselves, even in little bits, and just kind of bringing that great mother around you, because it's hard to be knowing but discounted at the same time.
Yeah, and I wonder if too, like in relationships, sometimes males have that strong archetype of provider, right? And I get that. That was very much indoctrinated into masculinity. And it's true in a lot of ways, and it's great in a lot of ways. And sometimes I find that can be disruptive when a mother's like, I feel this, but, maybe they're being contradicted. So
Right.
it's like, how do we enter
Absolutely.
into that relationally, even?
I think it's a challenge, and there are times when, I mean, there were times when I was literally fighting for the truth of that, especially in a bunch of males. It's not always soft. Sometimes it's like, let that to me. So, I also did a lot of prayer around that. I would say, it's both, it's spirit and body. So spirit is prayer, where you bring it to your own relational space with spirit and ask for support and ask for help. And I call on the mystery regularly. I have a place just on my urban household where I have a little medicine wheel in the backyard that has the directions, and it's only about yay big. But I go out there and I do prayer, and I talk to spirit, and I ask for help, and I ask for help for various family members and just myself. That's the spirit, and then the body part is, I usually try to do that first, especially if I'm in a difficult, challenging piece of one of these things. And then I get more clear, and then I come more direct with like a specific action. And that can be advocacy, it can be articulating what I do. I mean, it's unfortunately because the general cultures aren't just holding us up. Sometimes we do have to state more clearly what we're doing and why. It's
Yeah.
fierce, and it requires that at times.
And I think sometimes the delivery helps too
Hmm.
behind our words. Okay, so that was from Mothering from Center. I'd love to go into Wild Feminine. Beautiful quote. The feminine is our access point to the greater realm of spirit, yet most of our concepts of the feminine are restrictive and inaccurate portrayals of this profound way of being. As if looking at a vast landscape through a pinhole, we are missing the beauty that is right next to us. I love this
Mm,
so much. It makes me think of, does a flower even know how beautiful it is? Like it's
right.
planted, it's grown, and then you give flowers to someone, it's at celebrations. Does it know the love that it ripples just by being itself? This made me think of that. So, what would you say to this?
Absolutely. I would just continue to say that's kind of, we did talk about that a fair amount because it is so important, and I think we need to think about it for our sons as well as our daughters. It's like with daughters, we don't want to say, oh, you're pretty or whatever, because it diminishes them or something. At the same time, we don't say it enough to our sons, and there's a deeper
Yeah,
layer when you know your own beauty, which means you know your own connection to the feminine, which is so rich and deep, and it's a felt sense within, whether it's how you move or how you express or something you do or the way that you know it can be the way that you dress, but it's like you're doing it for because you're feeling your own connection to something beautiful. That is vital, and I think it's probably one of the most important medicines for our time, because when people feel that, they act differently, they are receiving
yeah,
something, and they can relationally operate differently versus from the scarcity when they don't feel that and have to try to extract it from others.
that's so true. Thank you for naming that. And then the other one is from Wild Creative, and it is, a great barrier to creativity is your own perception that you are not creative. Feeling uncreative limits the creative current. So, a lot of people I know, mothers especially, will become mothers and then they're like, who the hell am I? They go through, well, I know I am going through it. And it's like, where do I belong? What am I doing? And we forget that creativity can even be in like prepping your kids lunch for the day or whatever, and how would you say is a simple yet tangible way for women and men to, and just people in general, to reconnect with that creative flow?
Yeah, I mean, I usually will say to people, especially if they feel burned out, where are you generating your creativity? Where are you feeling inspired? And if they're like nowhere, I'm like, okay, well, that's where we need to start. Then it's like a fire that's gone out. You know, it should be a life force fire. And like for me, for a long time, it was writing. So I always made space for writing.
Mhm.
Even the year after I had my third child, which I was just overwhelmed with tasks, I made a commitment to writing one line of poetry a day in a little notebook. And it's pretty
Mm.
funny looking back on it because a lot of it is about fatigue. I was like, wow, I'm really tired. But there was a moment, I know, reality. But there was a moment, what I would do is I would drop into kind of this spaciousness. That's kind of what I feel like creativity is. It's sort of permission to not have anything to do for a little bit and just be. And I would drop into that and kind of feel that yumminess. And then I would write from that space. And so it can be anything, but it's a way of being. And usually there is something that you feel more enlivened by. And like writing for me, I got a little burned out, so I had to switch that off. So I think it's, you know, it can change and it can evolve, but really understanding that it's part of your life force, it's part of your connection to the mystery. It is really
Mhm.
important to feel. And so tracking back to that when you don't feel that way, you know, it can be something simple, but I think it's important to find it and nurture it. Just like if you had a plant that you were watering, you know, it's like you want to
Yeah.
give it some, you want to figure out what it is. It's okay to feel lost at times, and make no mistake, taking care of young children is just, it's exhausting and it's lots of tasks. But even if you can drop into a moment of, let's say you're rocking your baby and just like maybe it's a song that comes through,
Mhm.
you know, something that, or you're just noticing the beauty of the room. It's dropping into a state of being, and you know, or you're playing Legos or something. You actually
Yeah.
try to play and not just, you know, like actually bring out your inner child again. Those moments, you know, they add up, and it's not so much about making a masterpiece as it is finding that creative current.
It makes me think of that quote, "What you seek is seeking you." Like, do you know you are the source of the light you are looking for, you know?
Ooh, I love that. That's so true.
Yeah, and so much of your work speaks to that. And the last thing I wanted to share was I was like, okay, spirit, like show me how to navigate this conversation. Like, what do you want me to bring to it? And I opened it on a random page of one of your books, and the title of the chapter was Freeing the Wild Within, which I thought was so fitting. And I think it's where you speak to how these books came to birth, and it was just like this free flow. So I would love for you to share, in the light of Ritual of Wild, which is all about living your most authentic truth and your inner wild, what does it mean for you to free the wild within?
I think like the first thing that comes to me is it's kind of a self-love practice. You
Mm,
know, like if you think about children, they're in love with themselves.
so
They
true.
think they're pretty awesome, and everything, their movement, their voice, they're like a tactile, you know, I call them little wild things, because it's like, you know, my 2-year-old, I remember once was stepping on a banana and squishing it through his toes, and he was just having a delightful moment. So it's kind of like, can you open back up to that, you know, take off the prescribed notions and just be with what is, be with what's in front of you, be with your animal body, be with, you know, the beauty that's coming in a conversation, or in the light coming through the window, or in being able to hold a child in a moment that they needed it, or to be the ear for a young adult, or even just to feel your body and realize, you know, the miracle of life that you've brought through as a mother, and being able to cherish that even if your body feels a bit changed by it, you know. That's to me the practice of the wild.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing your heart with us. I feel like, especially at that point in which we wrapped up, that I got a hint of your inner child. So that felt really cool to receive. And lastly, I just would love for you to share how people can work with you and find you.
Yeah, my website, wildfeminine.com, has more information about my work. I teach online classes, and I do sessions in person, but also online. I love to work with women around the globe and just help them open up to their own medicine, because each one of us is carrying this beautiful treasure chest, and it's my joy to teach women and share that with them.
Amazing. We'll put all those links in the show notes. Tammy, thank you so much for being here with me. It was such an honor, and I just feel like I received such a sweet gift today by speaking with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for just holding space for these kinds of conversations, and for asking such great questions, and blessings on the Legos and the babies and the sweets. We still have Lego ships. Had to keep them. I still have some of their Lego creations. They're so sweet.
Oh, yeah. I feel like there's always that piece of our children with us wherever we go, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Tammy, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you, Jenny. You too.
Thanks.